One of the biggest weekends of the first half is here as the Braves host the Phillies in a three-game series. It certainly feels like a pivotal matchup for Atlanta's hopes of making a run in the National League East. I'm Grant McCauley. He's Chris Willis. We're going to get into that series and obviously some of the news that's been going on for this club in recent weeks as well. This is Battery Power TV. Before we get started, hit that thumbs up button, leave us a like on this episode, and make sure you're subscribed and turn on the notifications so you get an alert every time we drop a new episode of BPTV. Chris, we're going to get all into the showdown with the Phillies, quite obviously, but we have to play a little catch up. After missing last week, the Braves offense is once again missing, it would appear, or at least struggling to put up the runs they need to win some games and some series at the rate that they need to. And it kind of makes you wonder how much longer this wait is going to be for some of these things to turn around both individually and collectively for this team.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some home run balls flying out, but a lot of them have been solo shots. They led all three games of that Giants series. It's just been, frustrating is the only way I know to describe it because, you see some guys like Austin Riley and Jerry Kelenic, kind of get going, but then the rest of the lineup's still lagging behind. I think the injuries have really played a significant part of the offensive struggles. And other than just waiting it out and hoping some reinforcements are coming at the trade deadline, it's not there's not much it seems like they can do.
No, I mean, you can start shuffling and moving around some things, I would imagine, and the Braves are probably going to at least consider that, and that's something we'll get into a little bit later. But if we're looking to underscore just how difficult things have been for Atlanta, I've seen one stat more than any other this week, and that's that the Braves have lost their last 27 games in which their opponent scores more than 4 runs. Obviously, that is about as doom and gloom as the statistic gets when it comes to, feeling like at least some of these games were more winnable. And in fact, they were. But I wanted to get inside those 27 losses to see how many of those were close games and how many of those were just ones that were maybe a little bit more out of hand. That stat includes some of those in which the opponent scored way more than 4 runs, but more than a few that the Braves were in the mix. So as I sized all this up, there were 16 losses in which the opposing club scored 4 or fewer runs since April 27th. I think that's kind of more on the nose for this particular statistic. Those are well-pitched, manageable games, the kind that Atlanta has been winning the lion's share of in recent years. No two ways about it. For whatever reason, and there are plenty, which we've talked about this a lot over the course of this season, it's just not happening at the same rate this year, but it's going to have to change if the Braves really want to reverse their fortunes, and it could pick no better weekend to start changing than this particular three-game matchup against the first-place Philadelphia Phillies.
No doubt. I mean, there's no time, like the present as far as, so to speak, for this Braves team with the Phillies coming to town. It's kind of hard to believe, when you look at that big lead that Philadelphia's built, the Braves have only played 3 games against Philadelphia to this point. So there's still a lot of head-to-head matchups going in there. But I think, again, the frustrating part is, the Phillies have cooled off a little bit. They're dealing with some injuries of their own. This league could have been whittled down to 6 pretty easily, if you were just playing a little bit better. And then, and then all of a sudden now I think it's a 9-game lead coming into the night. So, they're going to have to really turn things around offensively, to make a charge. And I mean, if you really want to be doom and gloom and look at it, even the wild card lead has started to slip a little bit. So, it's just one of those things. I mean, we've been waiting on them to take off. But I mean, I think this Giants series was a microcosm of everything that we've been seeing. They jump out to a lead, they have one bad inning, and then the offense just can't manage to add anything back on, which is just not something that we're really used to seeing with this group because we've seen so many late comebacks, over recent seasons.
Yeah, and limited opportunities, it feels like, of late. If they don't cash in on 1 or 2 particular innings, the Braves offense has been unable to keep giving itself the kind of chances we've seen in recent years. And this has been the issue for 2 months, of course. And as you look back at those 27 losses when their opponent scores 4 or more runs, 17 of those when they score 4 or fewer since April 27th. I dug in a little bit further to see if there was anything else in there. 6 of those losses, 3 or fewer runs for the opponent. 3 of those, the opponent scored 2 or fewer runs. Those, I think, are pretty realistic over the course of 162. You're going to lose a few games in which you're just not able to score. The Braves were also shut out 3 times last month and have scored 1 or fewer runs 13 times this year as they prepare to play game number 86 on Friday night against the Phillies. Last year, Atlanta only scored 1 or fewer runs 12 times in 162 games, and of course went on a long run of just over a year in which the club was not shut out at all. And again, All these numbers only underscore what's not working for the offense, or to some extent, finding answers we're finding out is easier said than done for this club. The regression, though, Chris, year over year has hit harder than I think anybody could have reasonably expected. Then you take Michael Harris out of the lineup here. He should hopefully be back early in the second half. Ronald Acuna Jr., obviously done for the year. No bigger loss than that. Sean Murphy missed a couple of months. It all puts more pressure on everyone to perform, and I don't think you can take the pressing out of this equation or the situation the Braves have found themselves in over the past couple of months.
No doubt. I think they've been pressing. I mean, they started 19-9, and they've been basically a 500 club ever since. And I mean, I think pressing's been one of the biggest issues, along with the injuries. I mean, you just look at the lineup, and you see a lot of bench players in there because of the injuries. I mean, that can't be. There's been some offensive underperformance, but again, you're looking when you're having to play bench players every single day and pencil them in the lineup, it just magnifies the issues. And I think you've seen guys at the top of that order, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, others just, try to do a little too much at times and feel like, hey, I've got to try to carry the load. And I think that's just human nature. I just think that's one at this point, they're trying to, hey, we've got to go. It's not early anymore. We're past the midpoint of the season now and we've got to go. And I think anytime you try to do that, it just kind of makes the problem worse, I think.
Yeah, it compounds the issue, most certainly. Now, one guy we were talking about last time here on the show was Austin Riley, and he's continuing to prove that his struggles seem to be firmly behind him at this point. Riley's batting .364 with 7 home runs, 15 runs knocked in, and 15 more runs scored in the last 19 games. And that coincides with the drop to 5th in the batting order. But, hey, Chris, I think that the Braves are probably going to look at ways to shake up this lineup in hopes of finding some kind of I don't know, just overall middle of the order where things are going to finally click overall. And it's hard to imagine that Riley is going to keep doing all of this in the 5th spot of the order for too much longer.
Yeah, I've been thinking about they probably need to move him back up. And I mean, it's just like what you were just saying, though. I think he's played really well. Ozzy Albies, I think, has got a 7-game hitting streak, but they're just not able to string things together. So I agree with you. I think trying to mix and match here a little bit with the lineup and just to try to get something going, get a couple of these guys going at the same time at some key moments, would be big.
It definitely would be. Meanwhile, Marcell Ozuna has finally cooled off, which, is going to be expected and allowed over the course of 162. But Matt Olson has also fallen back down to earth. Ozuna batting 167 with just 1 homer and 5 runs batted in his last 17 games. He's also punched out 21 times in his last 60 at-bats. So the struggle has arrived for somebody who has really carried the club offensively for most of the season. Olson, meanwhile, has found the going a little bit rougher lately. 153 with 1 extra base hit, his only home run over the last 16 games. And he's the club's cleanup hitter and has just 3 runs batted in over that stretch. And when your 3 and 4 hitters are slumping simultaneously, it's pretty difficult to expect the lineup to be at its best and to provide the run scoring that the pitching staff so richly deserves.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, those are the key guys, especially with with Acuna out. Those are the guys that's got to go. Even if Acuna was in the lineup, these are still the middle of the order, the guys that's got to go. And, just for whatever reason, there's, you and I have talked, there's been a lot of barreled outs. There's been a lot of unlucky stuff. But I mean, you just cut right to it, though. I mean, they just haven't performed. And that's one reason this offense has struggled the way it has.
The rough patches for Ozuna and Olson, just one of the factors that makes me believe that Austin Riley may be moving back up sooner than later. I feel like at this point, that's just a necessity to get him the most plate appearances you can. Same could be said for Jared Kelenic, who's been doing well in the leadoff spot. 18 games since he took over there. Kelenic has scored just 10 runs. 5 of those have come on his own home runs, despite an on-base percentage that's been hovering around .350. That's just something worth pointing out, that even when he's getting on base, Kelenic has not been able to score the kind of runs that you would expect out of the leadoff spot. And I know it's not Ronald Acuna Jr., but he's been doing a good enough job of at least setting the table. Ozzy Albies has been serviceable, I think, in the 2 spot, but he's among the Braves hitters whose power numbers are down this year. That got me to looking at some of the projected home run totals for the Braves, and I'm glad you're sitting down because this is not exactly the kind of numbers that you would expect after what Atlanta did a year ago. Matt Olson's on pace for 23 home runs. Austin Riley is on pace for 21 home runs. That is adjusted for the time that he's missed and assuming that he plays the rest of the season or just about. Ozzy Albies, though, on pace for 12 homers. Sean Murphy on pace for 13. He missed significant time as well. Michael Harris was on pace for 12 before he got injured 3 weeks ago. Of course, Ronald Acuna Jr. is done for the year. On the positive side, Kelenic on pace for a 19-homer season. Ozuna still on pace for 40. But all this together, the Braves, as you look at this entire lineup, is on pace for 173 home runs this year after hitting 307 last year. I mean, that's a 40 to 45% drop off, a regression, however you want to call it. Braves, though, still leading MLB with an average exit velocity of 90.2 miles per hour. They rank fifth in barrel percentage. They led MLB in average exit velocity a year ago at 91 miles per hour, so not far off. And top baseball and barrel percentage, that's down slightly year over year. I don't know how you explain all of this, Chris, from last year to this year. The Braves need more power. That's pretty obvious. They also need more consistency or simply better results for the quality of contact that they're still making.
Yeah, and again, frustrating. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. You and I we cautioned coming into the season that, look, you can't expect them to surpass the offensive performance that they put up last year. That was a career season across the board, but I don't think anybody could have anticipated this type of regression. I mean, when I looked at Matt Olson, I still thought he probably won't hit 54 homers again, but I would have penciled him in the easy for 35 to 40. Yeah. And here he is, just he's going to have to get hot, to even come close to 30 at this point. And I mean, Austin Riley, same thing. I don't think anybody could have predicted this type of regression across the board. What's the cause? I think it's a lot of things probably. I don't think the baseballs are the same. I think there are people talking about that. I think the Braves have hit too many ground balls. I think they've struck out a little bit more. And again, the injuries, have played a huge part. But I mean, even when this team was completely healthy, they still weren't, the offense still wasn't clicking. So, I mean, how do you explain it? I don't know how to explain it. I mean, even if they were 100% healthy and you look at these type of numbers, even a guy like Orlando Arcia, okay, you could see, maybe he's been league average the last 2 years. I don't think we really would have considered him cratering the way he has offensively too. So, yeah. I mean, you can't really say enough about Jerry Kelenic because he was the guy that they were supposed to put in the ninth spot and say, you just go do what you do. And here he is now having to play one of the biggest key roles on the team offensively.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of people that on social media have been like, well, you can't win with this 7, 8, 9 that the Braves are throwing out there. And I'm going to point out, this was not the plan. This is not the way they wanted it to go. But when you got no Acuna and you got no Harris and, Orlando Arcia's struggles, I think could be covered up a lot better if the rest of the lineup was producing anywhere close to where it should be. You've got far too many reserves playing too often. I've heard that's another thing that people are like, well, why don't they have a better bench? Well, the answer is because their bench plays every day. And because their everyday guys are in there just about every single day. So the bench, those fits are harder to find because you can't guarantee these guys any playing time. That doesn't exactly make it a place that a bunch of guys are going to sign up to play. Even if you can win, you still want to be out on the field. And that's just not something with the DH now in place in the National League that allows for much for Brian Snitker to change. Now, injuries obviously are an issue, and that's probably a whole nother discussion for what Alex Anthopoulos needs to do coming up later this month to make this club a little bit better and get those reinforcements that you mentioned. But the plan was never to play the bench players as much as they have been. And unfortunately, even a guy like Adam Duvall, who was brought in to be that next line of defense, has struggled mightily against righties, though he is showing some signs of life here lately. It simply hasn't been performance across the board from just about everybody that you wanted to see and needed to see in most cases here. Let's talk about the Phillies and the series that begins on Friday night as they roll into Truist Park with baseball's best record. Offensively, this is not a very even matchup based on the numbers. Tail of the tape here. After leading the majors in runs scored a year ago, Atlanta has scored just 362 runs through 85 games this year. They rank 19th in Major League Baseball. Philadelphia, meanwhile, 4th in the majors and 2nd in the National League with 433 runs scored through their first 87 games of the season. The Braves don't have Acuna and Harris. This is well documented. Phillies, though, enter this series without Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber, as well as JT Realmuto. It could come down to pitching, and Chris, as we know, that's a quality that both clubs possess as well. The Braves pitching staff, a 3.47 ERA, third best in the majors, second in the National League. Only the Phillies have a lower ERA in the NL with their 3.17 ERA, which is the lowest in baseball. And as we look at these two clubs from 30,000 feet, it feels like the opening series of the season in which Atlanta took 2 out of 3 in Philadelphia was an eternity ago.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, it's surprising that you wait this long in the season to see them again. but that was a different Braves club, in that opening weekend than what we've got now. So, this should be a good. I think it's going to be an entertaining series. We'll see what the Braves do. I think this one, I don't think they've just been coasting by everything, but they're going to be the Phillies are going to have their attention coming into Truist Park. It's a big series for a lot of reasons. And I mean, it's one of those things, if you get a series win, you chip a game off that deficit, you keep yourself up. But I mean, if you don't show up here and you get swept away, you're probably putting yourself in a position where you're just going to be fighting for a wild card spot the rest of the way.
Yeah, I mean, you can't expect to overcome a double-digit deficit, in the second half of a season, most certainly. I mean, have the Braves done some pretty incredible things in that regard? Yes, but you can also count on one hand the number of times it's happened with a deficit like that. You point at 1993, you point at 2022, but those are outliers and not necessarily the rule and not the position the Braves want to find themselves in if they're unable to really start to make some hay head-to-head against the Phillies. 10 total matchups remain, the 3 in Truist Park this weekend, 2 more series ahead. But these clubs will wrap up their head-to-head battles by September the 1st. So that final month of the season, there is no more showdown if the thing does get close to expect a head-to-head opportunity. So every one of these, I guess, suffice it to say, counts double because of what it does with the head-to-head and what it can do for the standings. Probable pitchers in this series begins with a marquee matchup, Max Fried against Aaron Nola. Game 2, Spencer Schwellenbach faces Ranger Suarez. In Game 3, Reynaldo Lopez squares off with Michael Mercado. It's not all going to be decided on the mound, Chris, but it feels like those men will have a fairly large say in how this series could go, and that may be more true for both sides than it has been at any point this season.
Yeah, definitely with the injuries that both teams are dealing with. This very well could come down to the result of the pitching staff on both sides. Ranger Suarez has been amazing. That looks like a mismatch on Saturday, even though I feel like Spencer Schwellenbach's pitched pretty well. Really interested to see Reynaldo Lopez. He's going to be on regular rest again. He's looked like he's worn down a little bit over these last few starts. I mean, which is, again, it's kind of like Marcell Ozuna finally struggling. I think it was, expected. And Lopez probably needs that all-star break, to kind of recoup himself. But, anytime the Braves and the Phillies played, it's always been great baseball, and I expect it to be the same this weekend.
Yeah, one of the Braves' better rivalries. Obviously, they'd like to get the best of the Phillies. They'll take it in the regular season. Would love it to show up in the postseason, but there's a lot of baseball to be played between now and October, and the Braves and Phillies have 10 total head-to-head matchups left, beginning with the 3 this weekend at Truist Park. That brings us to the end of another episode of BPTV. Hit that subscribe button right here on the Battery Power YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications. You'll get an alert every time we drop a new episode. Thanks again for riding along with us. We appreciate it as always. For Chris Willis, I'm Grant McCauley. We'll catch you next time. And until then, so long, Braves Country.